Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 59 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, The Right Take on Entertainment. This week we're speaking with Stephen Miller, the mind behind the brilliant @RedSteez Twitter feed and co-host of the Conservatarians podcast. This week's show is sponsored by the Academy Awards. We'd rather have another big picture screw-up than have Rose McGowan anywhere near the stage on Oscar night. Before my chat with Stephen, I wanted to talk a little bit about Hollywood hate in the big picture. The election of Donald Trump really broke more than a few celebrities. And I know that's a very clickbait phrase, but boy, is it accurate. But what's worse, and I should say it's much worse, the unexpurgated hate coming from some pretty famous people. Cher, James Gunn, the director of the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, Chelsea Handler, Ron Perlman, Sarah Silverman, who recently joked about eating a fetus, ha ha ha, and of course horror maestro Stephen King. We'll get to you, Stephen, in a few minutes. And that's just a partial list, but there's something that's unsaid about all this hate coming out of Hollywood. It doesn't necessarily reflect the majority of the people who live and work in the industry. Certainly not the people behind the scenes. And what about the bigger stars, the Chris Pratts of the world, the Kevin Harts, the Dwayne Johnsons? There are many other people in Hollywood who either are quiet about their political views, don't share the hatred for about half the country, or maybe just are spreading nice things about others on Twitter, on social media, and in different publicity outlets. You know, their kindness doesn't really grab the headlines quite like their peers. And I have to admit that when I report on Hollywood, I often ignore that too, even though I try to reshare some of their kindness when I see it online. So what happens then? Well, we end up thinking the very worst of Hollywood. We think about a Sarah Silverman, a Chelsea Handler, a Stephen King, and go, well, these must be bad people or with some bad intentions. I don't want to be like that. Well, that's not the whole picture. It's just an incomplete portrait. And it's something I try to keep in mind when I'm covering Hollywood at HollywoodInToto.com and also this podcast. It actually reminds me of another guest that I had on recently to the show. Nico Perino is the, so to speak, the free speech podcast host. He said the voices trying to squash free speech on college campuses actually are the minority. They just make a lot of noise, and they grab a whole bunch of headlines. That's a problem. The same may be true right now for the vicious stars sharing their ugliest thoughts on Twitter when it comes to Hollywood and its brand. Now, you can't blame the Chris Pratts of the world for that kind of hatred. You just can't. But they should know, though, that it's getting harder and harder for the average consumer, that means me and you, to separate the two.
You're listening to my daddy's podcast. He still eats sandwiches with the crust cut off.
The celebrity tweet of the week goes to Stephen King. Yes, I told you I'd talk about Stephen in a moment, and we'll get to the good Stephen shortly. But for now, let's talk about the horror maestro. He attempted a really lame joke literally about 24 hours after a train collided with a truck. The train was carrying some members of the GOP. They were on their way to a retreat. The crash ended up killing a 28-year-old man and leaving at least 2 other people pretty seriously injured. It's kind of knee-slapping stuff, right? Well, Stephen King's tweet, and I'm not going to remend what he said here, but it was just tone-deaf and dumb, and maybe the worst of all, just hacky from a comedic point of view. But what's really funny from Stephen King? His attempt at an apology. Here goes. A rather thoughtless tweet from me concerning the train truck crash, for which I apologize, if one is necessary. It should be pointed out, though, that those Republican politicians, who can be heartless when they vote, immediately got out to help. Now, what he's referring to is that there were several GOP politicians who actually have medical training, who got out of their seats, recovered their wits, and tried to help those who were injured in the crash. Now, can you imagine trying to an apology and actually doubling down on what you're attempting to do, singling out and attacking the GOP? It's just absolutely gross. So, Stephen King, a nasty tweet, you should have known better, and your apology in a way was even worse.
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
My hit tip of the week is A Futile and Stupid Gesture. It's kind of a clunky title for a pretty enjoyable movie. It's a Netflix original that recalls the dawn of National Lampoon magazine. In a way, it's a traditional biopic until it isn't. The film sports a big meta-narrative while reminding us how huge National Lampoon was to late 20th century comedy. Need we mention some of the names associated with the comic magazine? Chevy Chase, Gilda Radner, John Belushi, Harold Ramis, some of the giants of the comedy scene then and sometimes even now. Will Forte isn't the best choice to play Doug Kenny, one of the magazine's co-founders. He's good enough, though, and the script is actually quite good. Some of the one-liners are terrific throughout. He really has sort of a distinct feel for who this character is, the smarminess of him, the snarky, and also the flaws in his difficult persona. This is not a great film. I think it's got some flaws, and I think that the combination of the very straightforward traditional approach and the wacky approach doesn't always kind of work together. But it's one of those movies where I had to stop it a couple of times just to kind of do different things. I mean, this is Netflix after all, but I kept going back to it, and I was very eager to see what happened next, even though I knew what the real story behind Doug Kenny is and how he died tragically at 33. Sorry if that's a spoiler alert, but that's comedy history. But the real takeaway from the movie is how the movie portrays the conservative movement. Now, there are some slams on Nixon, a couple at Ronald Reagan's expense. You kind of expect that, ha, he. But if they made a magazine like National Lampoon today, the PC scolds on the left would be absolutely trying to shut it down in any way possible. They'd be shaming it. They'd be calling the sponsors. They'd be doing whatever it would take to get that magazine off the newsstands or, I guess, off the online world. Conservatives, on the other hand, I suspect, would be fighting to protect that magazine on the grounds of free speech. So free speech is a really crucial issue in the magazine, in this movie, and it's good to know that while the subject comes up, the conservatives are now on the right side of history. And A Futile and Stupid Gesture just reminds us of that. Now let's get to my chat with Stephen Miller. Here's a quick confession. I retweet Stephen's one-liners at least once a day, maybe even more, on the social media outlets, mostly Twitter. He's one of the best right-leaning voices around, and you can follow him on Twitter at RedSteeze, RedSteeze. He's also the co-host of the Conservatarians podcast with former HiT guest John Gabriel. Plus, he's a FoxNews.com contributor. If you're not reading his stuff in one format or another, well, that's on you. Here's my chat with Stephen Miller. Well, Stephen, let's start with the laziest question possible, but I always think it's essential, especially if we're talking to someone like you. How did you get into writing, and more specifically, right-of-center writing? Because it doesn't seem like a very clear career path. It wasn't for me, and it wasn't for the people I've spoken to. So how do you get from A to B? Because it just seems like everyone has a different, unique story to share about that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of figured out that really the only thing in life I'm actually been successful at is my opinion. But I mean, if you want to talk about writing, I mean, I had been doing writing since, God, I was ignoring my algebra homework in ninth grade. I was always into writing and art and all of that stuff. I kind of got the bug in my my teenagers into my 20s to go into screenwriting and go into film. And I attended film school in Colorado. Got really super high marks there. I would say I had written about 7 screenplays before I was 22. Some of them took me a long time. Some of them took me 2 weeks, depending on, I would just get an idea and I would just sit kind of down and do them. And I had originally wanted to go into comic book writing, and comic book art was kind of where it was. And then I kind of saw how back in the day, I went to this like week-long camp, and I kind of saw how comic book artists kind of live. They don't really get time to actually craft their own style. Back then it was just ink and paper. You just had to get it out and get it going, and you didn't really have time to do. So I kind of fell out of love with that. I spent some time in Los Angeles kind of pursuing writing and film out there, and I got jaded with that industry as well. I've kind of just kept going and kind of just kept doing it throughout the years, either as a side or getting paid here and there for it. Mm-hmm. And of course, then social media blossoms up, and social media became a platform, especially like Twitter, Facebook, where you didn't have to, kind of get business cards and market yourself the old-fashioned way, especially in an industry like in Hollywood. You basically, if you just had a voice and you could put it out there, and hopefully people kind of catch on and listen to it, and that's kind of just what happened. I had a Twitter account and would throw my thoughts out there, which I have a lot of, as people who pay attention to my 100 tweets a day kind of see.
And by the way, that's at Red Steez, Steeze. So if you want to check out Steven's stuff, it's pretty good. Go ahead, continue.
Yeah, and I just I basically said, okay, well, this is sort of starting to take off, and I didn't really have any intentions to do it. I would just tweet on my phone while I'm walking somewhere or whatever. And I basically kind of set a rule where I said, all right, if I get 10,000 followers, I'll start a website. I'll start a blog where I can actually put some of the stuff down in long form, which is what led to The Wilderness, which was a blog that I still have, but I don't contribute to it anymore. I basically did three years there, and that kind of caught the eyes of, God willing, I have no idea how or why, but that kind of, it caught the eyes of some people at National Review. So I jumped over to National Review there. And then obviously went from there to Heat Street to contributing for Fox, and also New York Post I've contributed over at. And as far as like center-right dialogue, I kind of looked at the landscape. This was kind of Obama's second term, is kind of where I kind of got my butt into gear on this. When Romney lost, I kind of said, okay, here's how I view the landscape of the right, and here's where I think we're going wrong. And as far as media was concerned, I just wasn't really happy with a lot of right media. I'm still generally not happy with a lot of what's happening in the right media. But it's not necessarily for ideological reasons. It's not necessarily because, say Breitbart's gone, full Trump, and National Review kind of goes anti-Trump and all this other stuff. I feel like it's a really, like you said, select, narrow echo chamber of voices, because there's not that many outlets. And part of the thing that I saw kind of lacking with conservative media that I thought that I could help maybe bring to with my website is just kind of like a design. I have a design background. That's my degree. It was in multimedia design. So that's video, it's graphics, it's graphic design, it's web media. And so I kind of employed some of my graphic design and illustrating tools to kind of create a visual style webzine, I would say. That's not a cool word to say anymore. But so I created kind of this magazine style format with big graphics, and it was a post that would catch your eye as opposed to just my writing. Because when you're starting out, it's very rarely that just your writing is going to catch. There's very few blogs, I think, out there that can do that. And I didn't want something that just looked like a stupid WordPress site. No offense to people who actually do work hard. I don't mean it like you're working within the confines of WordPress, but I wanted something that was visually striking, that could get people's attention. I wanted something that kind of wrote about culture and media, which is something that the professional right just completely ignored and closed off for so many years. And in turn, because they got kind of pushed out of mainstream culture. And that, of course, I think led to a lot of the cultural pushback of why they were so accepting to somebody like Donald Trump, who they thought was in culture, and he was kind of on their side in media and big culture. And so I think that had a lot to do with his appeal. And so that was kind of my attitude was starting my website, and I brought some of that video work as well to Heat Street, and off and running. Now here I am, kind of committed to it for the rest of my life, because I don't think any independent job would hire me based on my Twitter feed. So I'm probably in this for a very long time.
There you go. Well, I think you found your calling, so that's the important thing. I want to talk briefly about Trump. I think every person who tried to predict Trump got it wrong, maybe except for Scott Adams of Dilbert fame. But we're now got a year under our belt. We've seen what's happened. How do you kind of assess year two moving forward? At times he strikes me as slightly more presidential than his sort of kind of cartoonish image. Other times he lives down to it. What do you think is going to happen the next year, just given the fact we've got some experience of President Trump under our belt?
If I knew what was going to happen with Trump, even tomorrow, much less in a year, I would probably be a lot richer than I am. I don't know. A lot of the reason why Trump happened, and a reason why so many people got it wrong, is he just defied he defied everything that we knew about politics and politicians and bases and voting blocks and voters. And I think Trump recognized early, I think a lot of the GOP candidates recognized early that Hillary Clinton was incredibly beatable, despite what the media was telling us and despite what, how she tried to kind of piggyback off of Obama's celebrity army magic, where she was appearing at all of her campaign rounds with celebs. And they were trying to, the main media that backed her was trying to basically meme her the way they did Obama, to make her look cool and look hip. We saw that on the Ellen DeGeneres show when she was trying to dance and she was doing the nay-nay and like sparks were flying out of her shoulder and she couldn't do it. And that's what I mean. They really tried to meme her and make her look cool and hip to the kids. And I think the only person that understood that was Trump. I think Trump looked at it and said, listen, if I can get through these guys, these 15 guys, and then also Fiorina, I'm home free. And I don't know how serious the other candidates thought that. And as far as like year two, I guess I can predict things. I don't think it's going to be a very good election for the Republicans in the midterms. I think a lot of people see that happening. But you also see a lot of these averages tightening up, where the Democrats had something like a 15-point lead heading into November, and now it's something like down to 4 nationally. So these races are going to tighten up. So it might not be as bad as people are predicting, but it could be worse. Who knows? But that's the whole point. We don't know what's going to happen between now and November. But generally, these midterm elections go very badly for the party in control. So I think what you could be looking at then is you have basically from February from November 1st. Sorry, I muted my microphone there on accident. I don't know what happened. So from February 1st to November 8th is basically, if you're Trump, and I think if you're advising him, you say you have from now until November 8th to get whatever you want passed. And that's it, because then we're looking at, if the Democrats take the House or the Senate or both, you're looking at complete gridlock for the next 2 years of Trump's term. There just nothing will be done.
Yeah, resistance on steroids.
Right. We saw this with Obama, where, people think Obama was such a consequential president, but he really didn't do much. From 2010 to 2016, when he lost the House, I don't think he passed a single piece of legislation. Everything Obama did was through executive action. And so if you go back and you look, Obama got his health care bill, and that was pretty much it. That's all he really got, other than, executive branch and budgets and things like that. But I'm talking about like agenda legislation. Obama knew he wasn't going to get anything through, so he gave up and he just signed executive orders basically. And I think if I'm advising him, I would say, what do you want between February and November? What do you think you can get passed?
Yeah, get her done.
I think you're probably going to see immigration take that over, but I don't think Dems are going to move on that because they want the wedge issue. They don't want anything done on immigration, so they can head into 2020, with the Dreamers and all of that and photo ops and things like that. As far as him, what do I predict? I mean, I couldn't tell you. I mean, he goes from day to day, hour to hour, week to week. I mean, you get good Trump, which is, just shut up and stay out of the news. And he did that the last couple of weeks when he was at Davos. And just be as just quiet as possible. But that's not Trump's nature. And I don't think he has people around him that are going to tell him that. I think they're just saying, well, we got what we got, and he's going to be Trump, and we can't be guarding him in his phone 24 hours a day. And, this is how we'll do it. So I don't know. I don't know how it's going to go. For every good thing that Trump seems to do, it's basically 2 steps forward, 1 step back with how and it's not so much of how he pops off on Twitter as much as it is how he gets himself in trouble on Twitter by saying things that his lawyers then have to take back, or we saw this with the surveillance law and the FISA Act, where he basically said the wrong thing, and then that was completely contradictory to what Paul Ryan and company were pushing, and so then they had to jump. And that's what I mean. It's not so much his insults of crying Chuck Schumer and stuff like that. I prefer that didn't happen, but kind of what Kevin Williamson from National Review said is, we bought the ticket and we're taking that ride, so that's who we're stuck with.
Or as Ben Shapiro says, good Trump and bad Trump. I want to circle back quickly to something you mentioned earlier, kind of just touched upon, about celebrities sort of rallying for Hillary a year or so ago. When you think about all the posturing and all the lecturing and all the speeches from Hollywood today, do you think that the industry in general, their influence is waning within sort of the general public? I mean, if you're very left of center, you'll applaud Meryl Streep no matter what she says. And if you're a conservative, you will hate what she says. But I think what they're really gunning for, I would assume, is sort of the middle of the road, the independents. And I get the sense that they are tuning out of the celebrity message, the vote for candidate X because we said so. What's your take on that?
I think, I mean, I had this discussion with Noah Rothman a couple days ago on Twitter where Trump himself is a celebrity. So to be able to say, you know, Sarah Sanders, I think, told CNN in an interview, she said if people about the Grammys appearance at Hillary, and they were kind of asking about that, and she's like, I just think it doesn't matter. If people cared what celebrities had to think, Donald Trump wouldn't be president. That's partly true. That's mostly true. But Trump himself is a celebrity, and I think that was a really interesting dichotomy that happened in the election. Is you had Trump, a celebrity, running against Hillary, who in herself is a celebrity. And then you had Hillary running with all, you know, she had Scarlett Johansson and Mark Ruffalo and Jay-Z and LeBron James and all of these people on stage with her, the cast of The West Wing and Bruce Springsteen. And I think that was the difference, is Trump ran on his own message. He got his own message out, while Hillary kind of used that as a crutch. She really, you know, depended upon people like LeBron James to get her message out, and Mark Ruffalo and Michael Moore to get her message out. So, I mean, is a public opinion waning on what they have to say? I think it also depends on the candidate that they're getting behind. I think it was easy for Obama because Obama was kind of the perfect corporate pitchman. He didn't have a lot of background coming into the presidential election. He didn't have a big record in the Senate that you could point to, so he's kind of this blank canvas that anybody could project onto whatever they wanted. He was kind of the product, and then you brought in the celebrities to kind of be the pitch man for this product, and it was easy. But as far as like now, when you see award shows like you saw with the Grammys and MTV Movie or Music Awards had Maxine Waters, and you obviously have every night you have Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert and these guys just kind of railing on about him. I think that there is a sense of fatigue will set in with people. I guess I also always looked at it as, I don't know why a celebrity would want to alienate 50% of their fan base. If your goal is a film, as an actor, is to make films and have people see those films so you can continue to make great films and be a high paid actor with, you know, you don't have to go back to waiting at, you know, a restaurant in Los Angeles. I don't understand the marketing philosophy behind, I'm going to alienate 40% of customers. I also think that they're more outspoken now because there are so many avenues of where revenue can come in from Hollywood. If people don't like what a celebrity is saying, they can just turn him off and go watch Netflix. They don't have to necessarily, you know, if Mark Ruffalo is talking about whatever, Bernie Sanders, and you hate Bernie Sanders, you probably are still going to go see The Avengers, but you may not go see like his important work that he wants to be taken seriously. I also think that because there's so much money invested over what's happening in China, how you have films now that are opening in China before they're opening over here. I think a lot of actors and actresses probably also think they just don't need American dollars as much anymore. They can open movies in China and that'll take care of it. So I think that they kind of don't think that they really need American audiences anymore. I think that explains why they're so outspoken. Mm-hmm. As far as the American public, I do think there's legitimacy to the point of you had every hip pop culture cool celebrity under the sun endorsing Hillary, and it didn't make a lick of difference. I mean, Hillary was gambling on media and celebrities dragging her across the finish line. She was absolutely counting on that. It's why she spent more time fundraising at Hamilton and at Gwyneth Paltrow's house than she did in Wisconsin, which is the running joke. She didn't visit the state of Wisconsin at all in the general election. which is why guys like me use that as a meme. Even if she even won Wisconsin, she still would have lost the election because she lost Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio as well. But Wisconsin's kind of the perfect summation of her kind of hubris of her campaign, which is, I'm going to win this, I deserve to win this, and therefore I need to go to Saturday Night Live in Hamilton and Gwyneth Paltrow's house and, thank my base. And you kind of see me on Twitter making that joke as well, where I always say Hollywood is the Democrat base. And I believe that, and I think it's true. And until the Democrats can separate themselves from that idea that our base is, young, rich Hollywood millionaires, they're going to struggle in places like Ohio. Minnesota only went for Hillary by 40,000 votes, which is unheard of. Places like Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, this is flyover country. It's a big cliche, but it's true.
Gotcha. We're talking with Stephen Miller, contributor to FoxNews.com and co-host the Conservatarians podcast. I want to get into a little bit of movie ticket sales because I know that they've been down and shrinking and not what they used to be, but the money isn't as down, I guess, because they've mentioned the foreign ticket sales and also the bigger the ticket price. What do you think about sort of the movie-going experience as a pop culture observer heading into 2018 and beyond? Because I keep talking to people, and it isn't just politics, although politics does play a part in it, where they say, I just don't go see movies that much anymore. I just don't go as much. Is now the time for Hollywood to worry, or is now the time where Hollywood will say, you know what, Netflix will save us, China will save us, streaming will save us, and even if the theatrical experience wanes, we get other bags in the basket?
I think that's part of it. I think that they do believe. I mean, you have Hulu and Amazon now are producing original content, and I think that that's part of it. I think the problem. I go to a lot of movies in the theater. Part of that is I have two theaters that are right within 3 blocks of me. I live in Brooklyn, so I have a couple really cool, just small indie theaters around where the audiences are mature and they don't talk and their phones don't go off. And if not there, I'll go into Manhattan, where this is one of the coolest things I say to people about living in a place like New York or LA is I get to see movies a month and a half ahead of people. Like, I had to remember that, like with I, Tonya and Phantom Thread, I saw these movies like 3.5 weeks before they came out in major release. And I was kind of like, why are people still talking about Phantom Thread? And they just actually opened nationally last week. It also makes it hard because I can't talk about them on social media or stuff. That's why usually when I see a movie, I write like 1 or 2 tweets and I leave it. The theater going experience has become such kind of an amusement park ride to me, where these multiplexes where, you go in, you get your 5-gallon tub of popcorn and your soda that, it is 6 gallons. And you put on your 3D glasses and the movie throws a million things at your face, and it's, Marvel and DC films. And I think it's become such kind of an amusement park ride that's what it feels like when you go to an amusement park. And that's why I think people maybe don't go to theaters as much anymore, because it has become such kind of an ordeal where you have to do all of it. You can't just like go and park your car and just walk in and sit down and enjoy a film anymore. There's 40 minutes of previews now, and here are your 3D glasses, and it really has become kind of its own separate experience. And the movie part of it is generally kind of like half of that experience. Mm-hmm. I am not a fan of seeing big blockbusters in films because I'm guaranteed every time I'm going to have a phone go off, I'm going to have people talking, and it doesn't kind of matter where I go. So I'm still hesitant to kind of go see these kind of big blockbuster films in theater. I think like the last that I really enjoyed in a really big screen was Blade Runner, where there's a theater in New York that they just redid their IMAX, and it's basically 5-story tall screen, all new leather chairs, and just kind of go in and you sit and you can pre-book your seats, which is the greatest thing in the world to me. And so that kind of stuff that I'm a fan of. I don't go to 3D movies anymore. Just my eyes don't really play well with it. For me, when I see a 3D film, it's like whatever's right in front of me is crystal clear. But if I even move my head slightly to left or right, I get like this blur. And so I'm done kind of seeing 3D films. The first I saw Last Jedi in 2D IMAX. I forewent like the full 5-story screen IMAX version of Last Jedi, just because I was like, I can't do it. And two, Star Wars to me doesn't scream 3D. It just doesn't. When you see Star Wars, you feel like old filmmaking and old style filmmaking. So as far as like the theater experience, these kind of giant multiplexes kind of in Star Wars, I think that's just going to get bigger, and I think Hollywood's going to kind of lean more into that because that's where their money is. But I also think, like what you suggested originally, do they think that because they have other avenues like China, and then again you have Netflix and you have Amazon, you have Hulu, you have all these options. I do think that they don't really rely as much on the opening and the shenanigans that happen with the red carpet and all of these things like that, other than the pomp and stance of it. But I don't know. I still think we're kind of in the middle of a big media wave where nobody really knows what's happening. We're kind of in the middle of the podcast wave right now, where there's all of these podcasts are kind of fighting it out. And so I still think we're in the middle of this wave where we don't know how this is going to land when it kind of either crashes or something else changes. I think in order for that to happen, you're going to have to see things like Netflix start to be nominated for awards. You're going to start seeing more actors go to Netflix. We saw that with Will Smith and Bright this year, which was kind of the big release there. So I don't know. It's fun. It's fun to watch. It's fun to. It's an exciting time to see how and where this is going to go. But again, as it relates to politics and stuff like that, I think that's why you have so many outspoken stars now, is because they just know that they don't have to rely solely on the American theater audience in the first weekend or two.
Mm-hmm. One last question, Stephen. I think there's a lot of negative trends you could point to in Hollywood, sort of the blockbusters, and even though I'm a kid at heart, it can be numbing. What are some positive trends you see in entertainment? It could be TV, streaming, movies, music. And I'll offer one to me. It just seems like the consumer is really in the driver's seat in 2018, at least as we enter the year. Netflix is just so cheap, and there's so many different options, and you could throw an antenna on your TV and kind of skip the cable experience if you want to. What are some more positive things that you see that you're kind of hopeful for?
Oh, geez. I'm such a cynic with media and Hollywood. I don't know about good. My complaint's always been because of the way like film has its own kind of seasons now, where you have the spring is kind of a lull, where studios release their films that they don't think are going to do as good in summer, but they're also not award films. And then of course summer is blockbuster. It's their tentpole films. And then you basically get down, I like to call it, we're basically down to 2 months of good movies, which is usually like around November, December, January, which is where they're all doing their award season push. And I think that's been kind of the formula for a while. Although, you had Get Out, which was released over the summer, I think, in June, and that obviously was pushed big for the award seasons.
Yeah, they're starting to shake things up. Even the Black Panther, which is projecting huge, is coming out in February.
Right.
So I think they're trying to tinker with that just for more competitive. But often, you're right, there are seasons to this, that's for sure.
Yeah, and so that's how I've looked at it for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, is where I don't really get excited for movies until around the end of the year, when I know that the content for the most part is going to be great. So as far as like good trends, I don't know. I'm kind of one of these guys where I look forward to a film coming out usually based on who the director or the writer is, similar to when I get anticipated with an album coming out from a band. I'm kind of like, oh, that's, Blade Runner is another example of that. When I heard Blade Runner 2049 was going into production, I was kind of like, oh, here we go. Here's another Harrison Ford thing where he's probably going to kill his character, and he's just, 70-year-old guy revisiting. And then within a week of that announcement, or 2 weeks, it was Ryan Gosling signs on and Denis Villeneuve is directing. And that's when I went, oh, okay, that brings some pedigree to the project. And of course it turned out great. So I kind of look at the slate of what's coming up. I think like Wes Anderson's Isle of Dogs is coming up. I'm really looking forward to that one, to see him kind of get back into animation with an original story. Yeah, there's a few others that are coming out that I know are kind of on the docket, but yeah, as far as like trends that I think are positive, I don't know. You might have stumped me. I don't know. what that is. I think, seeing what HBO does post Game of Thrones, I think is going to be interesting. Seeing where Netflix obviously keeps going. I'm not as big a Netflix guy as I think a lot of people are. I don't watch all of the series. I haven't watched Black Mirror. I watched all of like Mindhunter, but that's because I saw, David Fincher is behind Mindhunter, so I'll give that a go. So I'm curious to kind of see where Netflix keeps going with series. I think I just saw George Clooney is doing a project for Netflix. And I think Tom Cruise is doing something with Amazon or Hulu. So again, you're getting these bigger names that are going into these, into these venues. And so those aren't going to go away. I don't think streaming is ever going to go away now because of that. It just becomes a question of how far does it actually go, and does it override films? Does it override studio features? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if it goes kind of the way of where the music industry is completely gone to Pandora, Spotify, to the point to where nobody watches the Grammys anymore, not just because of politics. So again, it's an exciting time to kind of figure out what's going to happen. But I think anybody that can kind of predict good or bad, I think is just setting themselves up for disappointment, because we just don't know, and it changes so fast now.
Yeah, and I think the bottom line in a way is that the reason why we keep loving the 80s is because that was the last decade where the culture was more unified. I think we're just splintered in so many directions. And that's good because we have so many different options, but I think as a unifying element, we don't have those sort of forces that kind of align us together. And I think that's what you're talking about, where you can kind of split. But, it's all it's all the choices we have, and I think ultimately it's a good thing. And if the competition keeps up, I think the quality is going to really save the day.
Yeah, the good news is we can get back to the Russians now being the bad guys in films, which is what even through like the 9/11 era, we didn't have too many like Muslim terrorist films. Mm-hmm. So now, because of the whole Russia thing happening, we can just keep going back to Russia as the bad guys, and it's like we never missed a beat from the 80s.
That's right.
So I think even I even think the Creed sequel has Ivan Drago's son is going to be the villain against against Creed in the Creed sequel, which is like the Rocky 9 now. So yeah, that's the good news. So
you found some good news. It took a while, but we dug it up.
There, yeah, right. The Russians are going to be the bad guys in films.
There you go.
There we go. We can all get behind.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, Stephen, for joining the HitCast. Please follow Stephen's insanely fun and smart Twitter feed at Red Steez. Listen to his Conservatarians podcast and check out his columns at foxnews.com. Stephen, love your work, and I'm glad you took some time with us, and we will revisit this down the road.
Yeah, Christian, thanks for having me on. Anytime.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out HollywoodandToto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at HollywoodandToto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.